What if everything you've been trying to improve about yourself is exactly what's making you invisible? You may believe that what truly defines how you are perceived is what you do. The effort you put into your appearance, the way you speak, the stories you tell, the confidence you try to project. It feels logical to assume that the more polished your performance, the more attractive and noticeable you become. But there is something deeper happening beneath the surface of every interaction, something that cannot be rehearsed or perfected in front of a mirror. What people respond to is not the performance itself, but the emotional presence behind it. Emotional presence is not something you consciously display. It is something you either inhabit or abandon. It is revealed in how grounded you feel within yourself while you are speaking, listening, or simply existing in the same space as someone else. When you are truly present, there is no urgency to prove anything. Your attention is not split between the moment and the image you are trying to maintain. You are not calculating your next move or adjusting your behavior to fit an expected outcome. There is a natural flow and ease that cannot be manufactured because it comes from alignment rather than effort. The problem begins when you shift your focus away from connection and toward performance. When you start monitoring yourself too closely, you create a subtle tension within your body and mind. You begin to filter your words, measure your gestures, and anticipate reactions before they even happen. This internal pressure might not be visible in an obvious way, but it is felt. People sense when you are trying to be perceived in a certain way instead of simply allowing yourself to be experienced as you are. This is where many misunderstandings arise. You may think you are showing confidence, but what is being felt is strain. You may think you are impressing, but what is being perceived is distance. Because performance, no matter how refined, creates a layer between you and the other person. It is like speaking through a mask. The words may be clear, but something essential is missing, the sense of authenticity that allows someone to feel connected to you rather than just observing you. Emotional presence, on the other hand, removes that barrier. It allows a moment to exist without unnecessary interference. When you are present, you are not trying to dominate the space or control the outcome. You are simply participating in what is unfolding. Your attention is fully available, not divided between reality and self-evaluation. This creates a different kind of energy, one that is calm yet engaging, subtle yet deeply noticeable. People are drawn to this without always understanding why. It is not about being the loudest or the most charismatic person in the room. It is about the quality of your attention. When you truly listen, without preparing your response while the other person is speaking, it creates a sense of being seen. When you speak without overthinking every word, it creates a sense of honesty. These small shifts change the entire dynamic of an interaction, making it feel more real and less constructed. The paradox is that the more you try to achieve a certain effect, the further you move away from it. The need to perform often comes from a fear of not being enough as you are. And that fear subtly shapes your behavior, even when you are not aware of it. It pushes you to compensate, to exaggerate, to control. But in doing so, it takes you out of the present moment, and without presence, there is no genuine connection. What truly resonates is not perfection, but coherence. When your words, your body language, and your internal state are aligned, there is a consistency that feels real. There is no need to convince, because there is nothing being forced. And in that space, people are not responding to an image you are projecting, but to the experience of being with you in a way that feels unfiltered and real. There is a silent language that speaks long before you say a single word, and it has nothing to do with your voice, your posture, or your appearance alone. It comes from something far more intimate and often overlooked: the way you relate to yourself. You may believe that others are forming opinions based on what you show them externally, but what they are actually responding to is the internal dynamic you carry within. Your relationship with yourself is constantly being revealed, not through declarations, but through subtle, consistent signals that cannot be easily controlled or hidden. This relationship is not defined by what you claim about yourself, but by how you treat yourself in real time. It appears in the way you handle discomfort, in how you react when you are not immediately validated, in the boundaries you set and the ones you quietly abandon. It is present in your willingness to accept yourself without constant negotiation, and in your ability to remain grounded even when the external environment becomes uncertain. These are not things you consciously display, yet they shape the entire impression you leave behind. When your sense of worth depends heavily on external approval, it creates a kind of invisible instability. You may try to mask it with confidence, with humor, with charm, but underneath, there is a subtle tension, a need for confirmation that you are acceptable, desirable, or enough. This need influences your behavior in ways that are often difficult to notice from within. You might agree with things you do not truly believe, avoid expressing opinions that could create disagreement, or adjust your personality depending on who you are interacting with. These adjustments may seem small, but they accumulate into a pattern that others can feel, even if they cannot immediately explain it. On the other hand, when your relationship with yourself is more stable, there is a different kind of presence that emerges. It is not loud or forceful, and it does not rely on dominating attention. It is quiet, consistent, and grounded. You do not need to prove your value because you are not questioning it in the first place. This does not mean you are free from doubt or insecurity, but it means those moments do not define how you carry yourself. You're able to hold your own perspective without becoming rigid, and you can engage with others without losing your sense of self in the process. One of the clearest ways this internal relationship becomes visible is through boundaries. Boundaries are not about pushing people away. They are about recognizing what aligns with you and what does not. When you respect your own limits, you communicate self-awareness and self-respect without needing to explain it. When you ignore them in order to be liked, you send a different message, one that suggests your sense of self can be negotiated or compromised for acceptance. This is not something people consciously analyze, but it shapes how they perceive and respond to you. There is also a difference between confidence that is constructed and confidence that is lived. Constructed confidence often relies on external factors, status, appearance, achievements, and can feel fragile when those elements are challenged. Lived confidence comes from familiarity with yourself, from knowing your strengths and limitations without needing to exaggerate or hide them. It allows you to be at ease with imperfection, to make mistakes without losing your sense of identity, and to engage with others from a place that feels steady rather than reactive. What people respond to is not the image of someone who has everything figured out, but the presence of someone who is not at war with themselves. When you are constantly trying to escape parts of who you are, it creates an internal conflict that subtly leaks into your interactions. But when you are willing to stand in your own experience without excessive judgment or avoidance, there is a coherence that feels genuine and grounded. There is a difference between what is said and what is felt, and most people underestimate how powerful that difference is. Words are the most visible part of communication, the part you can control, refine, and rehearse. You can learn what to say, when to say it, and how to present it in a way that sounds confident or engaging. But beneath every word, there is an intention, and that intention carries a weight that cannot be disguised by language alone. It moves through tone, timing, pauses, and even silence, shaping how your message is received, regardless of how carefully it is constructed. You may believe that if you choose the right words, you can guide how others perceive you. But intention is not something that stays hidden behind vocabulary. It reveals itself through consistency or the lack of it. When your words and your intention are aligned, there is a sense of clarity that people can feel immediately. Your message lands naturally because it is supported by something genuine. But when there is a gap between what you say and what you actually want, that gap creates a subtle friction. The words may sound right, but something underneath them feels off, creating distance instead of connection. This is why trying to impress often has the opposite effect. When your primary intention is to be liked, admired, or validated, it introduces a kind of pressure into the interaction. You are no longer fully engaged with the other person. Part of your attention is focused on managing how you are being perceived. This divided attention changes your behavior in small but noticeable ways. Your responses become slightly delayed or overly calculated, your tone may shift in an attempt to sound more appealing, and your reactions may feel less spontaneous. These changes are often too subtle to identify consciously, but they are felt on an emotional level. In contrast, when your intention is simply to connect, the interaction takes on a different quality. There is less need to control the outcome, less concern about saying the perfect thing, and more openness to what is actually happening in the moment. Your words become a natural extension of your attention rather than a tool for manipulation. This creates a sense of ease, both for you and for the other person, because there is no hidden agenda driving the exchange. The absence of pressure allows the interaction to unfold more organically, making it feel more real and less constructed. Intentions also influence how you listen. When you are focused on impressing, listening often becomes secondary. You hear the words, but your mind is already preparing a response, searching for something clever or interesting to say next. This creates a disconnect, because true listening requires your full attention. When your intention shifts toward understanding rather than performing, your presence deepens. You become more attuned to subtle cues, to the emotions behind the words, and to the rhythm of the conversation itself. This level of attention is rare, and because it is rare, it is deeply impactful. There is also an honesty in intention that cannot be replicated through technique. You can learn communication skills, improve your delivery, and refine your social awareness, but none of these can replace the authenticity of a clear and grounded intention. When you are trying to get something from someone, approval, attraction, validation, it creates a kind of tension that lingers beneath your words. But when you are simply sharing, exploring, or engaging without a hidden objective, that tension disappears, leaving space for something more genuine to emerge. The challenge is that intention is often shaped by unconscious fears and desires. You may not even realize that you are trying to control how you are perceived or that you are seeking a specific outcome from an interaction. These patterns develop over time and become automatic, influencing your behavior without deliberate thought. Becoming aware of them requires attention, not just to what you say, but to why you are saying it. It involves noticing the subtle shifts in your energy when you feel the need to impress, to prove, or to secure a certain reaction. When you begin to recognize these patterns, you gain the ability to adjust not just your words, but the intention behind them. This does not mean forcing yourself into a different mindset, but rather allowing yourself to step out of the need for control and into a more open, present way of engaging. As this shift happens, your communication becomes more coherent, your presence more grounded, and your interactions more meaningful because they are no longer driven by the need to create an impression, but by the willingness to share a moment without filtering it through expectation. There is a quiet pressure that many people carry into every interaction, the belief that they must always know what to say, how to act, and where things are going. It feels safer to have answers prepared, to move with certainty, to avoid the discomfort of not knowing. But this constant need for control often creates the very tension it is trying to prevent, because life, and especially human connection, does not unfold in predictable scripts. It moves in pauses, in unexpected turns, in moments that cannot be planned in advance. And the way you respond to those moments reveals far more than any prepared response ever could. Uncertainty is not the absence of control. It is the natural state of every genuine interaction. No matter how experienced or confident you believe yourself to be, there will always be moments where you do not know what comes next. The question is not whether uncertainty will appear, but how you relate to it when it does. If you resist it, if you rush to eliminate it, if you try to cover it with forced confidence or unnecessary words, it creates a subtle sense of unease. That unease is not always visible, but it is felt. It shows up in hurried speech, in over-explaining, in the inability to allow a moment to breathe. When you're uncomfortable with uncertainty, silence becomes something to avoid rather than something to inhabit. You may feel the need to fill every gap with conversation, to keep things moving so that there is no space for doubt or awkwardness to emerge. But in doing so, you remove the natural rhythm that allows interactions to feel balanced and real. Silence is not empty, it is part of communication. It gives space for reflection, for emotion, for presence. When you rush to eliminate it, you signal a lack of ease with the moment as it is. Comfort with uncertainty, on the other hand, creates a different kind of presence. It is not about having all the answers, but about not needing them in order to remain grounded. When you can sit in a moment without immediately trying to shape it, you communicate stability. There is no urgency in your behavior, no need to prove that you are in control. This absence of urgency creates a sense of calm that others can feel, even if they cannot immediately identify its source. This kind of comfort also allows for authenticity to emerge more naturally. When you are not trying to force a specific outcome, your responses become more genuine. You are able to admit when you do not know something, to pause when you need time to think, to let the conversation unfold without constantly directing it. These small shifts create a sense of openness, making the interaction feel less like a performance and more like a shared experience. There is also a deeper level to this. Comfort with uncertainty reflects your relationship with yourself. If you trust that you can handle whatever arises, you do not feel the need to control every detail. You are able to adapt, to respond, to remain present, even when things do not go as expected. But if that trust is missing, uncertainty can feel threatening. It can trigger a need to regain control, to protect yourself from the discomfort of not knowing. This reaction often leads to overcompensation, trying too hard, speaking too much, or forcing direction where none is needed. What is often misunderstood is that certainty is not what creates confidence. True confidence is the ability to remain steady even when certainty is not available. It is the willingness to stay engaged with the moment without retreating into control or avoidance. When you embody this, it changes the way you are perceived. You no longer come across as someone who needs to manage every detail, but as someone who can move through unpredictability with ease. This ease is not about indifference or lack of care. It is about being fully present without being attached to a specific outcome. It allows interactions to develop naturally, without pressure or expectation shaping every moment. And in that space, there is a different kind of connection that can emerge, one that is not forced, not rushed, but allowed to take its own form through the shared experience of the moment itself. There is a common belief that a single impressive moment can define how you are perceived. A strong first impression, a confident statement, a well-timed joke, or a bold gesture can feel like it carries more weight than everything else. It creates the illusion that perception is built through peaks, those standout moments where everything seems to align perfectly. But in reality, people do not form lasting impressions based on isolated highlights. What truly shapes how you are seen is the pattern of your behavior over time, the quiet repetition of how you show up in ordinary moments. Consistency operates beneath the surface, often unnoticed in the moment, but deeply influential in the long run. It is revealed in the way you respond when there is nothing to gain, when no one is actively evaluating you, when the situation does not call for performance. These are the moments where there is no incentive to impress, and because of that, they tend to reflect something more genuine. The way you handle these situations creates a clearer and more accurate picture of who you are than any carefully constructed moment ever could. When your behavior shifts depending on the context or the people around you, it introduces a subtle sense of unpredictability. You may appear confident in one situation and uncertain in another, attentive with some people and distant with others, grounded at times and reactive at others. While this variability is natural to some extent, significant inconsistencies can create confusion. People may not consciously analyze these patterns, but they feel the lack of coherence. It becomes difficult to understand what to expect, and without that sense of reliability, trust does not fully develop. Consistency does not mean perfection or rigidity. It does not require you to behave the same way in every situation or to suppress your natural range of emotions. Instead, it reflects an underlying alignment, a steady way of relating to yourself and others that remains intact even as circumstances change. It is the difference between reacting impulsively based on external triggers and responding in a way that is guided by an internal sense of stability. This kind of alignment creates a sense of predictability, not in the sense of being boring or repetitive, but in the sense of being dependable. One of the most revealing aspects of consistency is how you act when things do not go your way. It is easy to appear composed when everything is moving smoothly, when you feel confident and in control. But when plans change, when expectations are not met, when something challenges your sense of comfort, your response in those moments carries more weight than any success. Do you become reactive, defensive, or withdrawn? Or do you maintain a level of awareness that allows you to navigate the situation without losing your center? These responses are not isolated events. They contribute to an ongoing pattern that others begin to recognize over time. There is also a difference between intentional actions and habitual ones. Highlights are often intentional. They are moments where you consciously try to present yourself in a certain way, where you put in effort to create a specific impression. Consistency, on the other hand, is largely habitual. It is shaped by your default ways of thinking, feeling, and behaving. Because of this, it is much harder to control, but also much more revealing. It reflects not just who you want to be seen as, but who you are when you are not actively trying to influence perception. People naturally look for patterns because patterns create a sense of safety and understanding. When your behavior is consistent, it allows others to feel more at ease because there is less uncertainty about how you will respond or what your presence will feel like. This does not mean you become predictable in a limiting way, but that there is a stable foundation beneath your actions. That foundation communicates reliability, and reliability builds trust over time. What often goes unnoticed is that small actions carry as much weight as large ones when they are repeated. The way you listen, the way you follow through on what you say, the way you treat people in everyday interactions, these details accumulate. They may seem insignificant in isolation, but together they form a clear and lasting impression. While a single impressive moment may capture attention briefly, it is the steady repetition of aligned behavior that shapes how you are truly perceived. There is a difference between being physically present and being emotionally available, and it is a difference that is often overlooked. You can stand in front of someone, maintain eye contact, say all the right things, and still feel distant in a way that is difficult to explain. That distance does not come from what is visible, but from what is withheld. Emotional availability is not about how much you reveal, but about whether there is an openness that allows another person to experience you beyond the surface. Many people learn over time to protect themselves by creating subtle barriers. These barriers are not always obvious. They do not always look like avoidance or silence. Sometimes they appear as controlled expressions, measured responses, or a consistent effort to keep interactions within a safe and predictable range. You may share stories, opinions, and even personal details, but still remain guarded in a way that prevents genuine closeness. It is a form of presence that looks complete from the outside, yet feels incomplete to those experiencing it. This guardedness often comes from a desire to maintain control. When you limit how much of yourself is accessible, you reduce the risk of being misunderstood, rejected, or hurt. It creates a sense of safety, but it also creates distance, because connection requires a certain level of exposure, not necessarily in dramatic or intense ways, but in the simple willingness to be felt as you are, without excessive filtering. When that willingness is missing, the interaction may continue, but it lacks depth. There is movement, but not true connection. Emotional availability is reflected in how open you are to experiencing the moment as it unfolds. It is present in your ability to respond rather than react, to remain engaged without retreating into self-protection when something feels uncertain or uncomfortable. It shows in your willingness to let someone see your genuine reactions, even if they are not perfectly composed or carefully structured. This does not mean losing control or expressing everything without awareness. It means allowing your internal state to be accessible rather than constantly managed or concealed. There is also a difference between sharing and connecting. Sharing can be done without vulnerability. You can talk about your experiences in a detached way, presenting them as facts rather than expressions of how they affected you. This creates information, but not necessarily connection. Emotional availability, on the other hand, involves a level of presence where your words carry a sense of lived experience. There is a subtle depth to them, a sense that they are not just being spoken, but felt. This depth is what allows others to relate to you, not just understand you. When emotional availability is low, interactions can feel one-dimensional. There may be conversation, humor, even moments of engagement, but something remains out of reach. It becomes difficult for others to fully connect because there is no clear pathway into your inner world. This does not always lead to immediate rejection or disinterest, but it limits how far the connection can develop. Without access to something more genuine, the interaction tends to remain at a surface level. On the other hand, when emotional availability is present, even in small ways, it changes the entire dynamic. There is a sense of openness that invites connection without forcing it. You are not trying to control how you are perceived or protect every aspect of yourself from exposure. Instead, you allow the interaction to include a more authentic version of who you are. This creates a space where others feel more comfortable doing the same, not because they are asked to, but because the environment naturally supports it. This kind of openness is not about intensity or constant emotional expression. It is about accessibility. It is the difference between being present as a surface and being present as a person. When you are emotionally available, there is a sense that you can be reached, that there is more beneath what is immediately visible. And that sense, even when subtle, has a powerful impact on how you are experienced and remembered. The truth is, you are always being seen, just not in the way you expect. And the moment you stop trying to control the image and start understanding the signals you send without realizing, everything begins to shift. Not because you became someone else, but because, for the first time, you allowed yourself to be seen as you truly are.